Welcome, everyone. Thank you. As if you didn't know already, you're at the final session of summer school this summer, and this session is called An Introduction to Careers in Environmental Law and Policy. And for those of you who missed earlier sessions, we are recording and videotaping all of our summer school sessions. You can access any of those sessions, including today, in our archives. You just go to the right-hand bar of ELI.org's website, click on More Events, and at the bottom of that page, click on View Past Events, and you can access all of them. And for those who don't know, your student membership at ELI is free. So for those of you who enjoy the series, you can sign up for an ELI membership and access all of our resources for a year at no cost. And I will now introduce our speakers. I, of course, am Rebecca Leamon. I am the Associates Program Director at the Environmental Law Institute, and our summer school program is co-sponsored by the DC Bar's Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources section. We don't have PowerPoints, but questions are welcome, and if you do have a question and you're on the phone or listening by webcast, you can email Marcia McMurrin, that's McMurrin @eli.org. And first, what I'm going to do is introduce the speakers and ask them to just say a little bit about themselves. And we can see if you have any questions at the offset. And if not, we can talk a little bit more about our backgrounds and what we've been doing. To my right is Khushi Desai. She is with Earthjustice. Next is Monty Cooper, and he is with Wallace Partners. And next to him is Mary Morningstar with Lockheed Martin Corporation. And then it's Grant MacIntyre with EPA. And at the end of the row is Juge Craig at Sidley, Austin. So, Khushi, would you like to start? And
Sure.
Say a little bit about.
Hi, everyone. As Rebecca said, my name is Khushi. I'm an associate attorney at Earthjustice here in the Washington, D.C. office. I've been there for about a year now. Prior to that, I worked in plaintiff side toxic tort litigation, which I can talk a little bit more about later on. But it's great to be here.
Okay. I'm Monty Cooper, and I practice law with Wallace Partners in Georgetown. So here in D.C., we're a commercial litigation boutique, but we specialize in environmental law in particular, environmental law, toxic torts litigation. And it's great to be here and talk with you guys.
I'm Mary Morningstar with Lockheed Martin. I've been with the company for 20 years, which is hard to believe. And I heard McDaniel College. I'm a McDaniel grad, but at the time I graduated, it was called Western Maryland, because that was 1981, dating myself. And I heard Ohio State. I actually am a Case Western Reserve law school graduate. So, Lockheed Martin has an interesting reputation. Everybody here knows we're a defense contractor, but believe it or not, we also have a very good environmental profile. Most of our new buildings are LEED certified. We've got a very active Go Green program, and I happen to do a lot of environmental remediation work. I'm the attorney for a lot of our cleanup sites. We're a company that is made up of a lot of old companies that manufactured a lot of big things for many years before environmental laws were even thought about in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so we have a lot of cleanups, and for the most part, we do the right thing, which is a good thing, and it's a good thing to work for a company like that. So, although it's been a long time that I've worked there, a lot of things have changed over the years. We've gotten a lot bigger, but our commitment to environmental compliance and, at this point, Go Green is something that I would be happy to chat with you guys about, as well as any other questions you have.
I'm Grant MacIntyre, EPA Office of General Counsel in the Cross-Cutting Issues Law Office. I've worked on administrative law as well as just started some work on environmental justice, a couple of very different things. Happy to talk about anything. I've been at EPA since 2008, was a clerk in 2007, just kind of went right through from law school to working here. And you know, as the lawyer, I do have to say my views don't necessarily reflect the U.S. government views or EPA views. So good, that's out of the way. Now I feel
Now
good.
you can relax.
My name's Jude Craig. I work at Sidley, Austin, which is a multinational law firm that has a full range of practices. I'm in their environmental group, which and do a range of compliance counseling, litigation, appellate work on rulemaking, before Sidley, going back, I graduated law school in 2000, spent several years working in Portland, Oregon for a law firm, came back to DC. I'd spent some time in DC between law school and between undergrad and law school, working for a policy organization on environmental science. So I came back to DC and spent a while doing consulting for NRDC and others, and then worked for a stint at a small nonprofit doing work that, with our stock and trade, was undercover investigations of international environmental crime. Then returned to law firm at Sidley, and winter quarters I teach an undergrad course at Stanford's overseas campus here in DC to juniors and seniors on international environmental law and policy.
Thank you. I guess we can start out by asking the audience if anybody has any questions, any at all about. Okay. Do you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I think there is enough of a range of backgrounds, interests, and that the most helpful thing that we could do would be to answer the questions that you're sort of thinking about, and from the really, ELI's done a wonderful job of compiling a great panel of speakers from a range of backgrounds. And so don't be shy. Rather than listening to us pontificate, it's better to get your questions.
And I could add that I was very impressed as you all were introducing yourselves, the range of internships that you guys have gotten into. I mean, I heard NOAA and Energy and Justice, and there were several others. I'm looking to the back of the room because I heard a couple in the back. EPA certainly, and I think that's, from my perspective, that would have, I did not do that, unfortunately, and from my perspective, that would have been a great, and certainly ELI, that would have been a great way to kind of have an introduction into the environmental world, to see if it's really something you want to do. I think most of you, with the exception maybe of you, are either an undergrad or you're in law school. You're in a master's program, right? In natural resources, I think you said? Yeah. And so I think that's a great opportunity to kind of figure out whether or not you think the environmental field is one you want to do. So I just want to laud you for that, because I think you all have done a good job at identifying things that may be helpful to you.
My background is in litigation, so I wondered what does environmental law and policy mean in each of your individual fields?
And I'm not sure if the phone heard that. What does environmental law and policy mean to each of our individual fields?
You know, I do a lot of, we do environmental litigation, I mentioned, in relation in particular to MTBE. And I'm going to try and answer it this way. I don't know if any of you have heard of MTBE, but it was an additive put in gasoline some years ago, and it was a groundwater contamination problem that has spawned litigation for a decade plus. And so what I do day to day, answering discovery requests, taking depositions, defending depositions, drafting motions on various issues. It's not a lot of public policy there. I don't follow the Congress, for example, because there's no more MTBE, or they don't make it anymore. But that said, though, we have done and we do a decent amount of environmental regulatory work, particularly in the area of clean air. And I've done some new source review work, and we follow, and climate change as well is starting to sort of come about and take shape, and so we follow a good bit what's happening on the Hill. Attempts to strip EPA for regulating greenhouse gases, for example, and so we follow law as it's being created for some of what, or at least what I do. But my day to day is really responding to our clients, making sure they're taken care of, making sure we're getting the answers we need, and sort of try and push the ball forward that way.
I think from my perspective, the company's perspective, for me personally, it's a lot of what Monty was just talking about, defending litigation, being an attorney for our Superfund sites. They're not all Superfund sites, but I use that as a shorthand. They're cleanup sites. And then I'm the environmental lawyer for all of our deals. So when we acquire a company, we divest a company, we look to see what the environmental issues are and what we're going to have to take care of. as soon as we acquire it, or what we're going to have to take care of prior to divesting it, and also safety and health. I have enough safety and health in my portfolio. I spend the great bulk of my time on environmental because, to put it bluntly, we don't have a lot of ongoing compliance problems. For the most part, our facilities, we have about 200 facilities in this country and about 130,000 employees, and we still make big things. We make the F-16 fighter jet. We still make a lot of big things, mostly for the Defense Department, and therefore employ people who are actually on a production line, putting stuff together. But we don't happen to have a lot of ongoing compliance issues. We periodically have compliance problems that actually some of my colleagues have used some of Juge's partners for. But I spend the bulk of my time on historical issues when it comes to the litigation, the cleanup. It's from what we did in the teens through the 60s versus what we did from the 70s on. We do some public policy work, and I personally do, on going to EPA to talk about standard setting for new, what we call emerging chemicals that previously there was no testing methodology to identify them in, for example, a groundwater plume, and the labs have gotten more and more sophisticated and are able to identify them at lower and lower levels, and woo, lo and behold, we have this contaminant to worry about too now to clean up. And we go to EPA and do some advocacy work in that arena. What's the sound science behind it, what makes sense, and things like that. But I would say from my perspective, the bulk of my job and my two colleagues in the environmental safety and health arena for this corporation probably spend 90% of our time on historical things.
It may not surprise you to hear that there is a lot of policy at EPA, and it's central in my work, but it's sort of unique in the sense that I get to decide none of the policy. What the role of attorneys in Office of General Counsel is counseling attorneys, which means we are involved with shaping a rule from the start, where we have a seat at the table, but it really is purely in a counseling form. The decision makers are the policy heads. They decide what they want to do. We counsel them on the legal options or risks that associate with their decisions. So it's very interesting that you get to see and hear all of the policy thought, and we're free to express our policy views, but that's not our role at the agency. So it's every day. I have to pay attention to the Hill. I have to do all of that work just so I can be completely aware of all the different policy options that we'll likely be asked to evaluate from a legal perspective.
And I would say if you're doing a good job practicing environmental law, there is a policy overlay to everything that you're doing. And it waxes and wanes if you are drafting legislation to feed into a push that's happening. There's a day, that day, it's a very heavy, very deep policy overlay. And if you're drafting piece of discovery correspondence arguing you need to turn over these documents, it's a very shallow policy overlay, but you still, even in that case, need to keep the policy maybe with a small p in mind to help shape the work that you're doing, because to be effective, you need to make not only the legal, statutory, or regulatory arguments, but you need to put them in a context that they're convincing. And so, that duality of law and policy is waxes and wanes, as I say, and it really depends on the day and the issue and the client, frankly, because some clients are engaging you because on a particular issue and fighting a particular issue to the death, maybe, whereas from an economic perspective, they wouldn't necessarily, for that particular issue, wouldn't necessarily think that it's worth it, but because there is a broader policy context, they've taken that issue and are pushing it. And whether it's in the case of toxic tort litigation, where it's a client, there's either a client or an opposing party whose case may make sense to settle, that may raise a particular issue that it makes sense from a policy perspective to continue to push it forward to trial or to the brink of trial.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right, from the public interest perspective as well. Earthjustice is a public interest litigation firm primarily, but we also do have a policy section which focuses on lobbying and really preserving any wins that we have in our cases, and really, effectuates what's happening in the policy realm of things, which is, at the heart of all of the litigation that we bring. A lot of our work focuses on the rulemakings that the government is pursuing, and, starting really from the beginning of an agency's actions and seeing it through to litigation. And that happens, in a variety of issue areas: clean air, clean water, the hazardous waste, really anything that you can think of. There's always the policy underlying tone. And I think your question is a really great one, because it's not one that's clear to, when you're in college or when you're in law school. And it's something that I remember wondering about myself as I was entering the profession. And it's not a clear answer. I mean, every organization seems to have its own way of handling policy and law. But even if you enter litigation and you think that your job is exclusively litigation, policy will always play a role in some level.
That's certainly true.
Questions?
For someone eventually ending up in government or in the NGO sector, do you think that what do you see as the use of having some firm experience? Is there anything you want to speak to that?
Oh, and the question is, if you want to work for the government or an NGO, what's the value of law firm experience?
Well, I know that a lot of attorneys at OGC came from large law firms, and we're perhaps looking for a bit less on the hours, but to still do interesting environmental work. And I know that it prepares you for high-level, difficult work, and it's going to be the same setting in government for the most part. You're going to have difficult questions, people that want answers quickly on their timetable, and having that sort of experience at a high level, working with there are clients in the private sector, of course, but they're something that people may not think about is we also have a client relationship in government work. Our clients, instead of outside businesses, are the policy decision makers. And much like a VP of a company, they're going to want to do something a certain way at a certain speed. And experience in a firm can help address that type of need.
Yeah, I think that's right for public sector work as well. I worked in private practice for about 3 years before joining Earthjustice. I did plaintiff side work, though, so I was at a small boutique firm, not necessarily, one of these big, large national, international firms. But I do think that the litigation experience that I was able to obtain at that small firm, it was really invaluable in entering the nonprofit sector later on. I know that there's folks out there that do spend several years working in larger firms and gaining that experience, and I see that as being really valuable as well. I think if you're intending to do litigation, it's probably it's a good idea to if you're unable to enter the nonprofit or a government position right out of school. I think getting that litigation experience can be key. And I know that a lot of when I was in law school, I interned or externed, whatever it was called, at DOJ in the Environment Enforcement section, and I recall there being told then that it doesn't really matter what type of litigation experience you get, so long as you kind of get the foundational experience that you'll really need to practice law later on. The idea, and I think a lot of groups have this, is that you can learn environmental issues later on, but you need to have that core set of skills developed really early on, and I think that works. That said, I think some nonprofits also, it seems like a lot of folks that work there have always sort of been in either the nonprofit world in some way. So, it's not to say exclusively that people go out, get a lot of litigation experience, and then are able to emerge into different arenas. There's just so many paths to get, into either of those worlds that there's not one right way of doing it. But I think, experience wherever you can get it is a good thing.
The only thing that I would add is I think it's very helpful to have different experiences, because I think it makes your your eventual law practice a little richer. So if you necessarily pigeonhole yourself in one particular area, I think it can. It doesn't necessarily, but I think it can be a little limiting once you want to expand into other areas, or you have a particular issue that seems a little thorny and your opposing side doesn't really understand your point. If you've walked even, a half a mile in that other person's shoes, so you at least got a feel of what the person is thinking about, then I think it can help your perspective and help the resolution along a little more quickly. I was with a small firm and for a few years, and actually was with a consulting firm right before I joined, at the time Lockheed, now Lockheed Martin. And it really has helped me over the years. And I know with my colleagues in the corporate legal department, there's a variety of backgrounds, including a couple of people who used to be plaintiffs' lawyers, some people who were with DOJ. And again, I think it helps when you have a little bit of a walk in the other person's shoes mentality, that you really understand where they're coming from. You can say, okay, I get that, but here's the reason why I think, my position may be a little more persuasive, but why I'm willing to compromise on these particular points. Resolution at the end of the day is what I think we all want. Periodically you do decide you're going to fight to the death, but for the most part you try to come to a resolution that makes the most sense for everybody involved. And when it comes to environmental practice, I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, I think at least my client, our vice president for ESH, certainly has the best interests of the environment in his head. And I think that there is a commitment there to want to do the right thing. It's just a matter of how you go about it. So I think getting a variety of experience, to Khushi's point, is probably a good idea, if you have that opportunity. Not to say it's necessary, but it may be helpful.
Yeah, I think once you reach the point where you're looking for positions, and if you're looking specifically at public interest work, you might notice that a lot of the bigger groups usually require, 2 to 3 years of experience, litigation experience or what have you, before entering. And that can be a really difficult situation to be in, because, a lot of people who are interested in environmental work don't necessarily want to join a big firm right out of law school, or, they don't know what other opportunities there are. And I think that's a time when you can be really creative and, try to seek out whatever opportunities that are available to you, whether it be a small firm, a state level government agency, even an industry group that you might not otherwise look to. Just kind of really keep your eyes open, because I think there's lots and lots of different places that you can gain that type of experience that people don't always think about.
Yeah, I don't think there is a right path to get to any one position.
Right.
And I think this is what you're hearing from everyone. And in fact, when I sort of continue to think about my career and where I'm going, try not to say that I want to be doing this job at this organization or this type of organization in 5 years. Instead, what you should be thinking about is sort of the cone of where you may be heading, and what is the next step that you're going to take that is going to accomplish, I would say, 2 goals. One is give you the broadest breadth of experience, because whatever you're doing, you want to suck the most out of it. And 2 is something that you're going to be enjoying doing. And that's important, because if you're not enjoying doing it, you're not going to do a good job at it, and you're not going to invest in job 1, which is getting the most out of that experience. And so if you are thinking you may want to end up in public interest or in a government position, and you're thinking about that next step, the question isn't really, do I do a firm or not? Although that's part of the question. It's what would I be doing, or where would I be working, or even more importantly, who would I be working for or with? Because that is those are the things that are gonna help you make that next step. Because there are very few sort of blind leaps from one career step to the next. It's usually because you've been doing something in that area, either professionally or volunteering, or because someone that you are working with or for has some connection there and either says, hey, you should look at this opportunity, or you say, hey, I'm looking at this opportunity, what can you tell me about it? So it isn't so much of figuring out how to get from point A to point B, it's what is the next step that I can take that's going to give me the broadest swath of opportunities to take my next step.
That's right. And if I may add too, some of you, particularly if you want to eventually work for one of the NGOs, you may have to work in private practice because you've got law school debt or something like that. And at least I had law school debt. I don't know what the rest of you have. But and you're in private practice, you're going to have to work for companies that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily, you never thought you were going to work for. We do a lot of work for Shell Oil, and so that was a new thing for me, particularly when I started, and I've enjoyed them as a client. Make sure anybody from Shell is on the phone. but being able to work in private practice is fantastic, in large part because you're going to get great experiences, but you also get a chance to do interesting things too if that's what you want. For a little while I was a member of an advisory council for the Trust for Public Land, which is a land conservation trust, and we did a lot of great work there, and enjoyed that, and at the same time was able to go back and really gain the skills that are going to be necessary to really do any kind of law, and certainly environmental law in the long run. So something to keep in mind. You can, as I think we've all been saying, you can get to where ideally you want to be in a variety of different ways. Don't shy away from one thing or the other.
We do have a question from the internet. This is a question that will probably not surprise you very much. It's about the job market. And they're just saying, it's looking discouraging for environmental lawyers. What's your perspective? And you might want to talk about your perspective given, who you're working for, the area government NGO law firm. Khushi, would you like to
Sure.
start?
Well, yeah, that's a tough question that I imagine plagues everyone, and I remember it being an issue for me as well not too long ago. I can't imagine it's too different from, even though we're all representing different organizations here. I mean, it's...
And different generations.
Yeah.
I can say for me, at least.
Right. I mean, it's challenging no matter where, what your intended employment goal is, really. But I think, that also goes to my point that I made earlier, which is about being really creative in your job opportunities. When I left law school in 2007, I was kind of confronted with that situation where I knew I wanted to work in public interest law and public interest litigation specifically, but I kept seeing very limited postings for positions to that effect, and even those that I did see required a 2, 3, 4, 5 years of litigation experience. So I chose to enter this small law firm, and it was not something that was really offered to me through my school. We had recruitment just like most other schools for large law firms and, the ones that most people already know about and positions that I wasn't really interested in. So my strategy instead was to find a job myself, which, sounds like an obvious thing to do, but somehow I don't think a lot of people think about doing it. So, I ended up spending a lot of time on Google looking for jobs, law firms that sounded like something that would be interesting to me. I was Googling things like, toxic tort and, oil spill and, all kinds of variations of terms. And I came across a firm that focused on underground storage tank leak cases, and I thought that was really interesting. And they weren't hiring at the time. I called them incessantly to see if they were interested in having a law clerk. That was my second year of law school, and the managing partner finally called me back and said, wow, you're really persistent. Why don't you send me your resume? I wasn't planning on hiring anyone because of the economy. I'm not sure that I can afford it, but let me think about it. So I sent him my resume. He invited me for an interview. I worked there for the summer. It was great. I got, it was a plaintiff's firm that focused on toxic tort work, but also focused largely on other types of class action litigation, consumer protection cases, antitrust cases, things that I never thought I would be even remotely interested in. But I did it knowing that I would get a decent amount of experience there. I ended up getting really lucky and working on environmental cases. I worked on climate change federal climate change actions, the Kivalina case that's currently in the Ninth Circuit. It was all really fortuitous. It wasn't something that I planned. I got offered to stay as an associate the following year after I graduated, and it was bad economy. It was just, a stroke of luck probably, but it also required a little bit of initiative. And I think that that's probably the best advice that I can think of right now, because I do know it's tough out there, and there aren't a lot of options. But I think if you just sit down and really think about what you need, and as we've all been saying, what steps will get you to where you want to go, and even if those steps don't seem as obvious as you would like them to try it.
I think Khushi raised a good point in your last comments, as well as the comments you just made about being creative and looking in different areas. One thing that a lot of folks probably don't think about, especially those of you who feel like you're on the environmental side of the house, and industry trade groups are not exactly what you would think about as being your dream job, but there are a lot of industry trade groups out there. They do, every one I can think of, even ones that seem to simply just focus on things like defense contractors, like the Aerospace Industries Association, does in fact have an environmental safety and health staff. Some of the trade associations have bigger staff than others. Some, like the American Chemistry Council, which used to be the Chemical Manufacturers Association, has a huge ESH staff. And if in fact, I know the job market is tough for you guys, and I don't envy you, but if in fact that's an issue, being creative, as Khushi said, so that you can kind of get some experience under your belt, even if it's not necessarily as an attorney at first, but going into the staff and learning that field, learning what you need to know about environmental safety and health, granted from the chemical industry's perspective, but at least then you get that perspective, and you get the knowledge base that then, if you want to try to get a job with the OGC at EPA or at DOJ or wherever you're thinking about, or at Earthjustice, that gives you an opportunity to say, yes, this is what I did, this is what I learned. No, I didn't work as an attorney, you know what the market's like, but here's everything I learned in 2 years. So I think being creative is extremely important right now. And I know there are a lot of folks, I myself went to a Tier 2 school, I know there are a lot of folks who are at Tier 1 schools in the audience, some folks at Tier 2 schools. That really shouldn't matter that much, but unfortunately it does still in the world. But then doing extremely well, which I'm sure all of you are doing, and then really thinking kind of outside the box. I hate that expression, but I had to say it. I'm thinking outside the box of what could I do to learn as much as I can in this field? You already are showing your initiative by all the internships I heard you talk about when you were introducing yourselves. So I don't think this is foreign to you. But what I liked about what Khushi said is really even going beyond that, to think about other organizations where you can get some really good basic knowledge of environmental safety and health, regulations and law, that then you can use as a baseline to then go out and try for something else.
And if I can add to that, I think that's fantastic. One of the ways you can sort of...
You just said that because I asked about your twins.
Well, no, that's right. That's right. Well, one of the things that I'd add too, when you're learning a particular, you're working for an organization and you're really learning the substantive area, one of the great things you can do is sort of write about an issue and really do that, because I get the sense a lot of you are in college, several of you in law school. It's a tough job market. It'll probably be that for a little while. And in as many ways as you can differentiate yourself from others and really show that you really know your stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Internships, no question about that, but certainly writing as well. And as you all know, writing kind of gives you a way to kind of really focus and hone in on an issue. And with all the great environmental law topics out there now, particularly in the clean air world that I probably know most about, there are a lot of things that I think employers, looking at your resume and see that you've written about a particular area, they may want to know a little bit more about it, and that might be a way to get an interview. One other thing I also mentioned too, and I think you can do it now, there are a variety of organizations that you can participate in. And I mentioned about the Trust for Public Land was one that I participated in for a little while. And I'm on the board of a few other organizations as well. When you're active, and you got to look for a job, that's one thing. That's the most important thing. That's a lot of time, I understand that. But your free time, the little that you have, if you really participate in activities that you're interested in, serving on the board, but just volunteering, it's a variety. It's amazing the number of people, the types of people you'll meet. And depending on the organization, several of those folks are looking for aggressive and active and smart people as well. So it's looking for the job, through the newspaper and through the internet, but also expanding your resume and then tapping into your networks as well. Those are all, I think, pretty good things coming up for you guys.
And that last point, tapping into your networks, do the research DC style, as opposed to what you are trained to do in undergrad and law school, which is to, well, for the few libraries that are still remaining, going to the library or sitting down at your computer and digging into it. Instead, pick up the phone and tap into your networks of professors, of colleagues, of former colleagues, friends, and have those half-hour coffees in the morning with someone who is doing a job that might sound interesting or that you think might have some good ideas about issues that you're interested in, and those connections help immeasurably. I mean, my first the internship that I did between my 1L and 2L year is exactly because of a classmate introducing me to another person and me following up with that person and using your networks, particularly if you're in DC, because that everyone here can attribute. I would say most everyone here can attribute their job, their current position, to a friend of theirs or a colleague of theirs being willing to spend 10 minutes and pick up the phone on their behalf and say, I don't know this person from Adam, but I know their friend, and they forwarded me this resume, and it looks like might be something that you're interested in, or they expressed an interest in your organization. So using your networks is really, really important. And the other piece that I would pick up is not only sort of going big and going mainstream, using the resources that exist, the Office of Career Services and the sort of, albeit now tougher track into the big law firm life, but also looking at the little smaller organizations that have a particular niche that either you have an interest in or have the barest modicum of some hook to say, I've written a paper on a topic that your organization is, your 6-person organization is working on. I'd like to talk to you, because a lot of those organizations are ones that just don't have the resources to be courting and hiring, and therefore, if they've got someone who's sitting in front of them who has a great resume, or a solid resume, or a solid interest, and the person has taken the initiative to say, as demonstrated, to say, I'm really interested in the work that you guys are doing. Talk to me, hire me. That may just work out, and it's happened for me a couple of times in my career doing exactly that, and working for very small organizations where you can get an incredible wealth of experience and become one of the leading experts in an area that you didn't know there were experts in.
And I'll echo several of those things. You already heard a lot, and I'll have even more to say. Maybe some stuff a little more specific to government as well. Along the lines of networking, you'll be amazed at how willing people are to set aside a half hour of their time, from the lowest employee somewhere to the top of the chain, because that's how we all know that's how you have to do it. And we all spent that time early in our careers, and you'd be amazed. Don't be afraid to ask anyone. The worst that they could say is no, and they probably won't say no. I've been pretty amazed just to be able to spend 15, 30 minutes with lots of different people. So don't be afraid to send an email, give a call, and they'll probably be willing to set up that time. And it is extremely valuable. That being said, don't be discouraged to just do what Khushi mentioned a little bit about, just looking on the internet, seeing someone that you have no contact with, sending them an email, calling them, sending your information in. I actually, came into EPA through the summer clerk program, and that was a blind resume writing sample dump at the start. got lucky enough to get the interview and went through the process. So don't be discouraged. That can, really all that costs, at least at one point, was a stamp, and now it might not even cost anything. It might just be email and internet space. So those are both important things. Monty mentioned writing, and it's not just opportunity to write. By doing all of the writing, you'll get experience writing, and you'll improve your writing. I have to say, from doing a little bit of interviewing, one of the things that is most noticeable is the difference in quality of writing. If you're looking at writing samples from an employer perspective, you can pretty instantly see a variation in ability. And so the best way to improve that is to continue to write, continue to learn how to write. So not only does it look good as a line on the resume, it looks good in the substance of your applications. And do it, and anyway, it doesn't need to be legal writing necessarily. It can be policy writing, writing editorials for campus newspapers. Just keep writing any sort of writing that you can do. Persistence, Khushi mentioned persistence, and that's true in any setting. I know one attorney that was rejected 2 or 3 times from OGC, but kept applying, and eventually the position came open at a time she applied, and the persistence paid off, and she kept in contact with people at OGC during that time. So persistence can work very well. Specific to government, I don't think it's a secret, and you see it in the news. The budget situation is not going to be great for government for the foreseeable future, and so a lot of that gets tied into the availability of positions. That being said, there are lots of, if you're interested in EPA or Interior or wherever, don't just focus on that agency. One of the best ways to do it is to do internships at all of the different agencies we heard from today, even non-environmental agencies. Once you get some experience in the government world, you start to look a lot better to any government agency, regardless of whether or not you work at the SEC. That still is appealing to somewhere like EPA because it shows that you're interested in that type of work and that you know what to expect from some of the government employment. There are other avenues in just through the government. One of the programs is the Presidential Management Fellows Program, which is available, I think, to grad students. It might be undergrads as well.
Recent grads, maybe.
Recent grads of college. I know several people that have gone through the PMF program and been placed either in policy positions, usually policy positions at first, but we have an attorney that started out in a policy position at a different agency and then came over to our agency as an attorney. So there are lots of, you have to expand, and honors programs. You'd be surprised how many honors programs there are. Regional offices of government agencies. EPA has 10 regions throughout the country. Each of them have their own honors programs for attorneys. DOJ has a well-known honors program for law students. So there are lots of opportunities. Even if your heart's set on EPA, think about some of the other opportunities out there to kind of get that toe in the door of government work if that's what you're interested in doing.
I want to pick up on 3 points, and I'll keep them brief, that Grant mentioned. 1 writing, 2 personalization, and 3 resumes. On the writing, use that as an opportunity, once again, not to just go to the library or sit down at your computer terminal, but use that as an opportunity to network, either in networking to get the information on the topic, or even better yet, networking on what topic you should write about. If there's an organization that you're interested in working with or for, reach out to them and say, I've got an honors thesis or a seminar paper I need to write. What would be a relevant topic for you that I could research? And that's a way to get A, interesting topics, and B, a personal connection with someone, because that may actually be helpful for them to have your written research and free work done, but they can also sort of guide you to a good product that will get you a good grade. So that's a win-win-win there. Second, personalization. I think you all know this, but we can't leave without having said it. don't just send a resume, a sort of blind resume. That really only barely works through the Office of Career Services. You really have to figure out what your hook and connection is to whomever it is that you're applying to, even if it's just to take 15 minutes to recraft the first sentence in your cover letter, so that there is so it's not just, dear employer, I am interested in a job with you. Instead, personalize it. And then finally, resume. One of the absolute best things that a colleague did for me was when I was senior, I was doing a work-study program here in DC, and about to enter the wide world of jobs and do the job hunt. One of my colleagues who was in charge of hiring for this small nonprofit I was working for dug into their archives and handed me a stack of 100 resumes and said, "Here, you might want to look at these." And it was the most instructive experience I've ever had in my career search, because I started flipping through them and realized what it is that you have always heard, that statement you've always heard, folks spend 40 seconds looking at your resume, or whatever the statistic is, and so you better make it look good. And having that stack of resumes and just flipping through it, I went home and I spent about 4 hours, I kid you not, reformatting my resume, not rewriting, reformatting, so that it looked decent, and so that it grabbed some of the elements from that stack that I saw that I liked, that helped make it jump out at me. So one thing that you can do is ask wherever you're working, hey, do you have a stack of resumes or Office of Career Services, and just look through them and see and be self-critical. And then the second thing that's very tough to do on a personal level, at least it is for me, and I think it probably is for most folks, but absolutely crucial to do, I'd recommend it, is get your friends or colleagues to look at your resume, preferably your friends, and ask them to be critical, because it's going to be anything from the typo that I guarantee is on the resume, and that I guarantee if you don't catch, your employer will, and you walk in, and the only thing highlighted on the resume is you're going to see a big circle where you used a comma instead of a period. And second, if you're not comfortable sharing your resume with your friends, this is your face to your employer. So you need to be able to get over that hump and get as much feedback as possible. Same thing for writing samples. And it's tough, because your resume is all about sort of puffing you up in some ways, or describing your experiences, and your friends and colleagues are a good check from a couple of perspectives. One is, if you're not doing a good job of puffing yourself up in areas where they think, hey, you're really underselling this. You said you managed case files on this. You weren't managing case files. You were the organizational backbone for this case. And they can provide that feedback, or they can provide the feedback where you said, managed case, and they can say, you might want to back off on that. So it's tough, but once you can sort of get over that hump of thinking, oh wait, I'm going to be giving this out to the world, I might as well get some feedback from folks who will take more than the 40 seconds to look at it and help work with me.
I don't want to completely beat a dead horse about writing, but and I think we're all guilty of this in the age of, shooting off an email because you've got 300 in your inbox, and, of not being careful about grammar and punctuation. I know it sounds really stupid, but I got to tell you, I was an English minor in college and I was on law review, and when I see a writing sample that has the wrong punctuation or says between you and I, It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. So I just want to emphasize, I know it sounds stupid and petty, because ultimately you guys are all smart, and I know that you understand what good grammar is and you understand what good punctuation is. But, and to be blunt, I mean, I'm almost 52. So for me, I wasn't raised in this generation. I had my first computer, my second legal job in 1987. So, you know, before that I used a dictaphone. So I'm your parents' age. For you especially, because you did grow up in the computer age, you did grow up in learning to be on a computer probably when you were 2 years old. You really have to think that's not necessarily the people you're writing to. You're writing to some old crotch like me who's going to, you know, look at it and say, oh my God, I can't believe she put a semicolon there when it was supposed to be a comma. And that's, again, it sounds really petty, but it really is important. And I love what Juge said about you know, having somebody else read it. And I would recommend, even if you trust your parents or you trust an older aunt or uncle, or as my husband says, aunt or uncle, then have that person read it. If you don't want your parents to because you think they're going to be too critical or they're going to be too supportive, get somebody who you can really say, I want you to look at this critically and tell me if it's right. Because it really, sadly, really does make a difference. I don't think it should necessarily, but it does. So.
And put the shoe on the other foot of folks who are looking through that stack of
Right.
100 resumes.
Right, and it's just
they're looking for something to differentiate
Right.
folks.
And that's just a differentiation point. It can be. And again, maybe it's petty, but it shows to me, if I'm reading it, that you have taken the time to make sure all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that you really are taking this seriously, that you put your heart and soul into it because you think that this is a good position for you and you really want to put across the right impression. So I'll jump off that dead horse now, screaming for mercy.
Okay, thank you. We can now change tack a little bit. A question about school. Would having an undergraduate degree in a scientific field help you as an environmental attorney, such as ecology, environmental science? And then the second question is, what's your reason for getting into environmental law?
As someone who has a Bachelor of Science in Earth Systems from the early years of the Earth Systems program at Stanford, I'll absolutely say yes, but then I'll turn around and say, no, what's most important is doing well and enjoying what you're doing and using that as a springboard. So if you're not doing a Bachelor if you're not getting a scientific degree, it's perfectly okay. Plenty of my colleagues who are doing some of the most technical environmental law cases are not folks who have a technical undergrad or master's or PhD. Others are. But it's making the most of the experience that you're doing. So it's not so much getting the particular degree, but it can certainly help. And the second question about why getting involved in environmental, I would say it's twofold. One is I grew up in Alaska, so the environmental debate raged throughout my entire childhood, but that's not actually the reason. It's because the environmental issues are so diverse and they pull in such a broad range of disciplines that I couldn't really focus as an undergrad and wanted something where I needed to take some biology classes, some economics classes, and geology, and continue to follow in that trend of every day I love my job because I have to either interact with an expert in an area that I didn't know there was an expert in to begin with, or pretend that I'm an expert in an area that yesterday I wasn't an expert in. And so it's that incredible diversity of subject areas, from working with the National Trust for Historic Preservation on putting together a case as to why a quarry shouldn't be built right above a historic town in West Virginia, and working with a leading historian to try and put together that case, or turning on that same case and working with a leading hydrologist about what the potential impacts of that quarry may be on the water coming down. That's why I do environmental work. It's that intellectual curiosity and not ever wanting to get bored the job I'm doing.
I think the science degree, I agree with Juge with everything they said. And then just one additional thing in EPA work, where it can help you, I don't have a science degree, but where it can help you is that lawyers and engineers speak different languages. So it might help you in communicating and figuring out that language bridge. Very different approaches to language and ideas.
Which is often your role,
right?
As it's translating what
Right.
the technical folks are saying to something that the court will understand.
Right, or even into the rule text so that people can comply with it. You have the engineer say, well, we need that widget to be whatever science words they use. And you're like, well, no one will understand what that means, so can you help me figure out what that means? And that's absolutely true. I actually thought for the longest time I was going to be a meteorologist. Was always interested in the weather. And then I sort of discovered, with the help of being forced to take math and science classes, which I did not like, that was really more of an interest in the environment and the policy around it. So I think it's a pretty typical avenue, but it really it was that interest in environmental policy and I saw that a way to do that work was through environmental law. So that's really how I got into the work.
I was actually a political science and English major at college, so had, I thought the environment was interesting, but back in the early 80s, that wasn't necessarily a big focus. And when I graduated from law school in '84, it was in the middle of the Reagan years, and I wanted to do women's and civil rights law, and there were no jobs in that area because Reagan had effectively decimated the EOC and other organizations that did work in that area. So I just happened into a small firm that did environmental auditing, early days where companies were trying to get environmental legal liability insurance. And I was the lawyer on environmental audits. It is not at all what I plan to do. To this day, I keep my fingers in the women's rights and civil rights areas. Was active in the McDaniel Women's Leadership Network for a while. I had to stop for a while because I was traveling too much, but so I try to dabble in that. I'm active in the National Women's Law Center. So I kind of have kept that part of my first love. Don't tell my husband I said that. But I do really love working in this field. And for me, over the years, it really has been that it's a job that's challenging. It's changed greatly over the past 26 years that I've been doing it. Again, being with a corporation that's not necessarily, I don't have to worry necessarily on a day-to-day basis about compliance. I'm lucky enough to work for a company that does feel like compliance is important. But working on historical things and changing over the years of what the focus has been, I've really loved it. But I can't sit here and say it was my first love. It wasn't. But it's been a great career, and I highly recommend it no matter what area you want to go into, because there's definitely a huge, I think there's going to be a lot of work in the future on global climate change. I think that's a massive issue for our world that we're facing. I think it's real. I think it's anthropomorphic, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the NGO world, in the government world with USAID. I heard a story on NPR this morning about the fact that part of the Somali drought, or maybe it was this afternoon on my way here, the Somali drought issue is due to global climate change, and and that's an area that you wouldn't think about. Would you work in drought relief necessarily for USAID, and you're the environmental expert? I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can do environmental law that doesn't sound like the traditional. And I say this for myself, the traditional in-house counsel or large law firm or even nonprofit that may expand your horizons. And I think this field in particular has those opportunities out there.
Yeah, I sort of similar experience to Mary. I sort of fell into it. Black way to say it. I went to Georgetown as an undergrad and was a liberal arts. It was an American Studies major. That's my major. So something as far away from environmental law as you can find. And went to William & Mary for law school, and then did a joint degree in public policy. And I remember being in law school, trying to really figure out, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I really loved policy issues and thinking about policy issues. But trying to figure out what could I do, Then I clerked for a federal judge in South Carolina for a year. And when I was coming back up here to D.C. with my wife, we just had twin daughters. That's what Mary was sort of talking about.
5 weeks old.
5 weeks old, so I'm a new dad. when I came back up here, I was really trying to figure out a place where I could get great experience and do interesting work. Sort of fell in with a boutique that did sort of all of it. And so, and right around the same time, this is about 2005, Katrina happened. And some of the global warming sort of issues were sort of coming to the forefront. And so, for me, in doing sort of the practice, that I was engaged in, but also being able to sort of read about some of the issues in the public press, and then having great organizations like ELI to sort of learn more, sort of add on to what I was doing, write a little bit as well. Those things sort of helped me along. So I'd say, you don't necessarily have to be an environmental sciences major to do well here, but you certainly want to have the critical thinking and analytical skill set. It's perhaps most important. And then the way to present it, i.e. writing we've talked about, but presenting as well, talking about the issues at various forums, et cetera. So.
I actually always knew that I wanted to do environmental work. I'm not going to try to pinpoint a specific, experience that led me to it, but I entered college as an environmental science and policy major, which pretty much set me up to take a lot of politics focused courses, a lot of government classes, but I also gave the opportunity to take science-based courses, and I did do that. I took not really heavy science courses, but some of the soft sciences, some biologies, conservation biology, some chemistry, and I enjoyed it. It wasn't essential for the degree, but I thought that it would be useful because it's so clear that environmental policy work even is very interdisciplinary. It brings in all kinds of issues, and sometimes you can really easily foresee science being relevant no matter what you're doing. So I did take that coursework, and then when I went to law school, I actually started taking some public health courses that were offered by the School of Medicine at University of Maryland. So I thought that was another, kind of additional angle to supplement the environmental coursework that I was getting through the law school. As to whether it's essential, I don't think so. I think it's certainly helpful, as others here have said, in communicating with various individuals that you work with on a daily basis, experts, for instance. It's a language, and like I said, it's interdisciplinary. So having that background, having that ability to just communicate, have conversations with all of the players is very useful, and not too many people have that background, so it's a good way to stand out. I mean, if you do take courses in some of these heavy sciences, and you can figure out a way to link them to the work that you want to do in the environment, even if it's legal policy litigation work, I think that's a good way to stand out from the crowd, and it will certainly make you valuable. But again, I don't, it's not necessary.
But if I can just say, it's certainly great, and I certainly. I sort of wish I'd taken a couple environmental classes, and I did law review in law school, but I wish I'd tried out for the Environmental Law Journal. I mean, so your great backgrounds and internships are really, you're just a step ahead.
Yeah, a lot of folks. I think Monty's point. I feel like a lot of people later on do say, "Oh, I wish I did take those courses." So that's something to keep in mind. You don't need it, but it's going to be helpful. Science is around.
No, yeah.
Actually, go ahead. Well, this is a question, maybe you could answer it first. It's sort of related. This is someone who's in a master's program, curious about internships and employment opportunities. For instance, a master's in marine resources management from Oregon State University. It's more specialized, but.
Marine resource management, wow.
In terms of advice, or I assume there are various issues on the Juge.
I was going to say, like NOAA.
Yeah, I
would think about
National
NOAA.
Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration is one thing that immediately springs to mind.
Right.
But I think all of the advice that we've been giving over the last however long it's been about doing the research to figure out where are the organizations, both big and small, that do the type of work that you're interested in, it is the sort of general advice that I would give, because a panel of folks who don't have that specific experience aren't going to be the best resources to figure out what's out there, because we're going to come up with the NOAAs and the Oceanas and the Ocean Conservancy of the world, because those are all the biggies, but they're not going to necessarily think about my old organization, the Environmental Investigation Agency, which has a small program focused on whaling and cetacean issues. And so I would say, you know, for whatever particular niche and interest that you have, it's both doing the research and also doing the networking to keep asking folks, what's out there, who do you know, who's doing what.
Did you say the questioner's from Morgan State?
Or Oregon.
Oh, Oregon State. Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, we're doing a cleanup outside Baltimore now, and we've got a sediment issue. And in the state of Maryland, the Maryland Department of the Environment regulates the remediation part. But the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, which is a separate organization, I think probably because of the Chesapeake Bay, regulates sediment cleanup. And they've been terrific to work with. And I think there are probably, in fact, I'm sure there are probably equivalents to that in other states, including Oregon and Washington, given the fact that they're coastal states, a DNR type of organization versus kind of a traditional regulatory enforcement agency like a Department of Environmental Conservation or something like that. So I think that may be a place for the person to look. I don't know, Grant, I'm looking at you. What do you think?
No, along those lines, it's not just federal government. There's state, city, county that do that type of work, and even within the federal government, you'd be surprised at some of the overlap sometimes.
Right.
NOAA will do a lot of the marine work, but there'll be overlap when it comes to vessels going in and out of the water. Will be EPA does some of that work. Mineral Management Service and Interior will do a lot of that work involving marine. So you expand beyond the obvious ones and start to look for the different niches even within the federal government.
The other thing to start to look for is what are some of the cutting edge issues, as opposed to the specific organizations that you may see coming down the pike, be they sediment cleanup or with the Portland Harbor, and that's not, I would say, necessarily a cutting issue, but ocean acidification, some of the overlap between climate change and the marine issues, but to generalize this, not to the specific question, but to everyone in the audience, you're at a point where you can start to focus your career on some issues that may be blossoming, and you can get a leap ahead of folks who are sort of coming lately to an issue despite the fact that they've got a decade of experience. And if you've written something or researched or taken a class on an area that's sort of a new issue, that gives you yet another hook to think about.
You know, it's funny when you've been in a field for certainly as long as I've been, and certainly my colleagues, how you start to not narrow your reading, but you start to like focus on certain issues when you pick up the newspaper. For me, I pick up the newspaper. You guys probably do it online, or open the New Yorker and there's a 20-page article about the BP oil spill, and it was brilliant. And I happen to know the general counsel of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and who was basically living it real life, and I sent it to him and said, I want to get your opinion about this. He said it was dead on. I mean, the internecine battles between EPA and the state regulatory agencies along the Gulf states, and how DOI played into it, and it was just fascinating. And Monty made this point a few minutes ago that, and Juge made this point brilliantly also, that reading, just expanding your horizons. If you're interested in environmental stuff, there's a lot out there. I mean, and just, you don't have to read it all the time. I love novels as much as the next person, but when you see an article in the environmental arena, it's kind of funny. I tend to drift toward that, or I hear something on the radio, or I open the newspaper and there's an article in the in Science Times about some environmental issue that I've been interested in or that is new to me and I'd never heard of in my 26 years. And it really does expand your horizons, and as you said, it kind of sets you apart a little bit, because you can say, oh no, I heard that story about Somalia, that was fascinating, and this is what else I've read about that issue. that really does make a difference if you're sitting in an interview with somebody who wants to know how serious are you about this. It really does.
And just to add, the great thing about a lot of you, all of you seem to have environmental sort of internships already. So I mean, you're interested in the area as well, and it's just a matter of just adding on to it. To add to the gentleman who's in the marine sciences, the field. And this is, I think, for anybody really, particularly a lot of you guys are in college. It's fantastic because if you're that specialized in what you want to know, you can certainly go on the internet and find who the people are, who the players are, and really work to, we've talked about sort of working our networks, really building your networks. If you're going to write about an issue, contact that person via email, particularly young guys in college. I mean, everybody wants to help out the college, young, aggressive college person, and you get the email back from whoever it is, that's someone who should be in your email list, and so when you write the article or when you make the presentation about the article of some group, you send an email to that person, and you're able to really expand your practice. One, not a lot of folks are doing it, so you'll stand out that way, and by the time you're looking for a job, you've got all the avenues, but you've got really a great network of people who are working directly in the field you're interested in, and you're known as that sort of up-and-comer. Everybody wants to sort of be near the up-and-comer, even if the market's tough. So, something else.
I think we had go ahead.
You mentioned a lot of the environmental issues being sort of like global issues, and I understand that with a background in law, or if you're studying law, you might be sort of confined to the country in which you study the law. What are like the options of working on international topics and international areas with a background in law?
I'll field that one.
If you want to repeat the question.
Yes, the question is whether studying law sort of confines you to focusing on issues in the particular country in which you studied the law, whereas environmental issues can be global in scope. And I'll absolutely say that that's not the case, because there's a wealth of opportunities to do international environmental law and policy work. And going back to the first question of whether it's law or policy, I grapple with that every time I need to put the title on my class, because I'm not sure that there is such a thing as international environmental law. There's certainly international environmental policy, and being able to bring your expertise either to a government agency that is doing, that is, if you're coming from a country that has a strong environmental set of laws and regulations, there are a number of opportunities to do through governments and NGOs to do outreach to some countries that are still in the process of developing their laws and helping them in particular areas develop their laws. That's one option. Working at the international level on international environmental legal or policy issues is another opportunity. Advising multinationals on the laws of the country in which you have the background on is another opportunity. I mean, one of the difficulties that multinationals face is understanding both the law, but also the context and the approach to law that different countries take where they have operations in, and it's once again gets back to the role of translator almost, but not in the sense of translating the language, but translating the culture. Because with some of my clients, I've dealt with that with either U.S.-based multinationals that have European or operations in Central and South America. It's being able to help translate the expectations that that the parent company may have for the subsidiaries or for the operations there, and the expectations that, and then working with local lawyers to understand what the context is at the national level. So there's a wealth of opportunities, I guess, is the short version. And I guess the last point is, as with anything, gathering more experience is helpful. So if you get to experience working in multiple countries or dealing with multiple legal systems, that will help distinguish you as well, to be able to say, oh yes, I have some experience working with the European Union regulations, or in Brazil, or in the US if you're a foreign lawyer. That's helpful.
I agree completely, and Juge mentioned what we call capacity building, where federal government, EPA, in conjunction with the State Department, will go and do some work in other countries that don't have a legal system developed, or in some situations there's not only not a legal system, there's not electricity. It's one of those emerging type of issues, those cutting edge issues, that if you get involved now, you'll understand more in a year than people working there for decades will ever possibly. So much. One thing is bringing cell phone based decision-making technology like that eBay uses to resolve disputes automatically with a computer. There's just so much out there that we can do as United States attorneys to help either do capacity building or work with clients from other countries. It really is there's a lot of opportunity.
I actually think it's probably the biggest potential growth area in the environmental arena. I think with global climate change, and certainly the EU has been quite active in past promulgating pretty stringent regulations over the past few years. In fact, this week I spent 3 days in a REACH training seminar, and we've got a whole REACH committee made up of our global supply chain people and our contracts people and our engineering departments to make sure that we can comply with REACH, when in fact we don't really have a ton of international operations except for in the UK, but we just export to a lot of places. So
REACH is the European Union
chemical regulation right.
Regime that's coming into that's in place.
It's in place, right?
Phasing in over the next.
And so there's actually quite a bit of work. That's the woman from McDaniel, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's actually quite a bit of work in the international arena. And again, I think it's really a potential growth area, if not a real growth area. To Khushi's point, you really can look beyond, the NGOs in this country, or go to the NGOs in this country and see what they're doing in areas that are related to environment, but not necessarily have a stamp that says this is environmental law or this is environmental policy. But because of, again, global climate change and other, biodiversity, certainly the sustainability of our oceans and our other waters, all of these issues are global in nature. There's no way around it. And I think that having a background, being interested, taking some courses, doing a lot of reading about international environmental issues can only help you.
Or the regulations themselves and laws are international. It may be a national issue,
right.
But you start to see echoes of the laws that were written in the 70s
right.
in the U.S. or echoes back
right.
with the REACH's potential impact on Tosca,
right.
or
right.
what's happening in REACH China or around the globe.
Yeah.
So you take an issue like chemical regulation, and you can start to see that there's a real role for understanding what's happening around the globe.
Yeah, and I think in terms of job opportunities, there's plenty of public interest organizations out there that do have at least a few attorneys working on international issues. Earthjustice is one of them. We have an entire international law section that's in our California headquarters, and there's CL, there are opportunities, and I think I had an interest in international law back when I was in college, and I remember thinking, gosh, it doesn't seem like there's too many organizations out there that you could actually work for, or really build a career on. But again, takes a little hunting, a little looking at different types of organizations, not just the most obvious ones, if that's really what you want to do. But it is probably a field that you would need to, put in a little bit more extra work trying to carve out a space for you, because I think, generally speaking, a lot of people are interested in international environmental issues because it sounds so tempting, it sounds so interesting and fascinating, but trying to really figure out what you can do within that realm is pretty key.
And it may be actually flipping it as I'm interested in timber issues, or I'm interested in chemical issues, in particular the international aspects of that, because folks, eyes will glaze over a little bit if someone says, and I've been saying this for most of my career, I'm interested in international.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Are you interested in international law? Are you interested in treaties? Are you interested in transnational law? The law as between individual nations? Are you interested in a particular substantive area, be it marine issues, forestry issues, chemical issues, that have an international component? And so that's also something to think about, to be a little bit more nuanced beyond just I'm interested in international issues writ large. And I say this as someone who has said that in his entire career. I'm interested in international issues, but you need to sort of dig a little bit beyond that.
Okay, and also, of course, ELI does a lot of international work. So those of you who aren't members, you can join and even volunteer. We're always needing lots of help. Okay, there are a couple of questions here. I think I'll take this one first. Any more audience questions, actually? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was interested if you could talk about the role of law and policy. I know we kind of talked about policy and law, but like if it is kind of possible to do policy without law, or how that works.
I'm sorry, I lost the last bit of what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like if knowing law and going to law school is necessary to do environmental policy.
I don't think so. I mean, I personally think a law degree is, and maybe again this is old-fashioned, I personally believe a law degree is a good discipline. But to be blunt, it's expensive. I've got a niece and nephew right now who are thinking of going to law school, and they're not quite sure why they want to go. And I was a little blunt with them and said, look, to be honest, the market's hard, and if you really don't know if you want to be a lawyer, no, I absolutely don't think you need to be. I think being a lawyer can help, depending on what you decide to do with it. But there are many people who do environmental policy work who do not have law degrees. I mean, the gentleman who's getting a master's in natural resources is probably just as qualified to do environmental policy work as someone with a law degree. He just is not necessarily good. He's not going to practice law, but he probably is qualified to do it as well as anybody else. So my gut is no. I think a law degree is a good degree, but in this market, unless you really know that law is what you want to do, I'm not sure if I would necessarily recommend it right now. I mean, you can always go to law school when you're in your 30s when the market calms down, when the economy comes back a little more, which I firmly believe it will. But it's not necessarily, it's very expensive, and getting jobs out of it is a little bit difficult. So if you're really interested in environmental policy, there are definitely other avenues that you could take, I think.
You can spend those 3 years getting experience
Absolutely.
doing environmental policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rather than studying
Contracts.
law.
Mm-hmm.
Torts.
Yeah, I think Mary made a really, really important point for this session, which is if you are not sure that you want to be a lawyer, you should really think hard about going to law school, especially today. I mean, I know, plenty of interns and plenty of students who I went to school with who have had a lot of trouble trying to find jobs because they entered law school thinking, this is a good way for me to spend 3 years. I'll develop skills, and that's true. I mean, you do develop unique skills in law school. It's it's not a useless degree in any sense. But if you are thinking that it's just a good way to spend time, and that it's not really, you don't intend to use it in a clearly defined way, you should, really sit back and think about it, because, it is an investment, a big one, and it's a time investment. It's stressful, and if it's not what's of interest to you, you might not end up using it. And I went to school with plenty of people who had an interest in doing environmental policy work, and they do environmental policy work, but their colleagues don't have JDs and they don't need them, but, they do the same things.
I would recommend a master's, definitely.
Sure. Yeah. Grad school,
yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
A master's definitely helps, if not a PhD, but a master's definitely helps give you a bit of a leg up, which is ridiculous because a college degree is worth something, but be that as it may, a master's does give you a leg up. But if you're not 100% sure, not right now. I mean, again, I firmly believe the economy is going to come back, whether it's with this president or the next president or whatever. I firmly believe it's going to come back. It just may not come back for another 4 or 5 years. And in the meantime, you're going to be spending a lot of money, going to school when you're not quite sure. And you may be completely sure when you're 32 because you've had that experience of doing public policy work for the Environmental Law Institute, which is a really amazing organization, or another organization. And then when you're 32, you can say, okay, good, now I'm good. First of all, I've saved a little bit of money. I've had some experience. I now know environmental is definitely what I want to do. And now I'm going to apply to law school. And guess what? By the time I get out, the economy is going to be pretty much recovered. And we're solid then. So.
And while you're in law school, you're going to do a much better job and get much better grades because you're more focused.
Absolutely.
And you're doing it because you want to do it, not because it seems like a good thing to spend a couple of years doing. And when it comes time to prep for exams, you may not be as motivated as you would if you knew why you were there.
No, I went straight through. So for those of you who went straight through, I'm not maligning that at all. I did it, and thank God things have worked out all right. But I completely agree with Juge. I had colleagues back in the day when I was in school. There weren't that many people who took time off like there are today, and the folks who took time off really seemed to be a little more focused than I was. So I definitely agree with that too.
Go ahead. Who was one of you first?
I don't know, but I can ask. I have a quick question, sort of rolling off the last one. If I'm more interested in environmental policy, so I'm wondering, I'm looking at master's programs now, do you guys think it's better to have one that's more focused on the science side of things or the arts, so more of a policy master's?
Wow, that's a toughie.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
As someone who I did a master's in public policy, so I guess I can somewhat answer this. I was about to say I can't really answer, but if you can develop hard skills, if you will, and I think the sciences really give you the opportunity to do that. Just as an initial matter, I'd go there, and I'd imagine any master's program, the great ones, you're going to be able to take a policy class here or there. You can take an econ class wherever you are. It certainly doesn't hurt. But I'd probably drift more towards whatever the hard science is a master's.
I think I'd agree with that. I don't have that background in either undergrad or law school, but I can tell you, having a science background, engineering, geology, I think probably would be helpful in the environmental policy arena. A master's in public policy is a great degree, but it's broad. And you can focus, as far as I know, you can focus. But again, I think any master's is extremely helpful. So whichever way you would decide to go. But I would agree with Monty. I think probably if you can focus a little more on the science, it may be helpful. That's not particularly helpful, but that's my 2 cents.
All things being equal, I would tend to agree, because back to my earlier comment of trying to figure out what gives you the broadest breadth of opportunities for the next step. If you get a master's in a particular science, you can head in the direction of that science, but the policy realm isn't closed to you. In fact, it may open some additional doors. Right. That said, much more important to do something that you're going to enjoy and you're going to do well and that you're going to suck the marrow out of. And if you're working closely on a master's with a particular professor who has a wealth of contacts, that's going to be more valuable than anything.
Than understanding
than
what parts
picking,
Yeah.
picking a
is, right?
particular degree.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
again, it's important both just for your day-to-day enjoyment, but also I say for your career, to do something that you actually think that you're going to enjoy.
Yeah.
Maybe challenging, but something that you're going to enjoy rather than something that you think is the right box to check.
Yeah.
And you'll see better results. I know that in law school, for me, the level of my grade was directly related to the level of my interest in the course. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
you'll see that. So don't check the box. Don't go do something because people say, oh, you really need to do this.
Yeah.
Try to think of ways that you can make it enjoyable for yourself.
I agree.
Yeah, for a master's in particular, I mean, that's a time where you should, really be refining and figuring out what your interests actually are.
Right,
And,
right.
if you don't like science, you don't like science. You don't need to
Or
like
if you're not
science.
good at it.
Yeah, if
Right,
you're not good
right,
at it,
right.
don't suffer through it. It's not essential, as we've all said. And even if you do take a more public policy steered route, you'll have opportunities to take some, more basic science coursework. They offer like epidemiology courses
right.
for non-science majors or
Toxicology for
toxicology, things like
non-toxicologists,
that.
yeah.
I mean, those are helpful too. So I don't know that you should just be focused on science or not science.
Right.
Just do what's fun.
Can I change my answer? No, I agree with what everyone said. The importance is enjoying what you're doing and doing well at it. Because people look at the grades,
Yeah.
It's
They
hard
do.
to kind of explain, well, it's a tough major or it's a tough master's.
Yeah.
My question, so I'll preface it by saying that it's pretty clear to me that I'm interested in doing something in the environmental field, and what interested me about this panel was the variety of arenas that you all represent. And unfortunately, the job search isn't so much about just what am I interested in, what do I want to do, it's about who wants me. As much as I'd like it to be about both, I think it's probably more about the latter. And I do have several years of experience before I went to law school. And I have a lot of management experience. And that's something that I almost never hear discussed in terms of a legal career. And I'm just wondering, is there any arena that it is more pertinent for or more useful, and how would you sell that skill?
NGOs, non-governmental
NGOs.
organizations need managers.
An in-house counsel. I mostly manage. I manage outside law firms. I kind of try to manage my in-house client, which is our environmental safety and health group. I really think that if you decide you eventually want to go in-house, having a management background is really valuable, because most in-house departments are not big enough to do. I mean, I haven't taken a deposition since I joined Lockheed in 1990, so I have lawyers I hire to take depositions and to do discovery and to write briefs and to write motions for summary judgment. I don't have the time to do that with my caseload. So, but having a management ability and having some management insight, either innately or because you've learned it, or both, and you probably have both, to manage different types of clients. In an organization. I mean, I have people I work with who are geologists, who are environmental scientists, who are toxicologists, who are epidemiologists, who are MDs. And knowing, to Grant's point, being able to speak that language is a management skill, really, is managing their expectations of what kind of legal advice you're going to provide, knowing that they've got a management imperative. We have shareholders, we've got all sorts of things we have to answer to. So what's the management imperative that you have to have insight into in order to do a better job is very key. I agree with Juge. I think at an NGO level, it's also extremely important. Khushi can obviously
Yeah,
speak
I
to
mean,
that
I haven't
more.
seen that background. I think it's really interesting. And if you could figure out a way to spin it in these ways, I mean, I could see it making you stand out significantly. I mean, management of clients, of co-counsel, of dockets, of pretty much anything that you're doing, even in the litigation world, is hugely important. And, even outside the litigation world and policy, there's a lot of ways to sell management skills, and it's not something that we see every day, at least not something that I see every day. So depending on what your interest is, like I said, if it's litigation, to really figure out a way to pinpoint that and how you would use it in dealing with these client issues and dealing with the case issues that might come up. And I think I don't see how that would be a bad thing.
Oh, it's definitely an asset.
Yeah.
And spending some time to think about how you can sell your skills to the organization that you're in front of, and say, I don't know exactly where you work, or what you did, but being able to say, my experience doing X, I would think would be fairly helpful for case management or dealing with a range of briefs that are coming in, or dealing with life if it's a small nonprofit, dealing with life and helping share some of the management load for that, or for I mean, like, without stepping back from the specifics, to the general point is spending some time in advance of sitting down with someone, be that in a formal interview or an informational interview, and saying, how can I generalize my experience to be applicable to the person I'm sitting in front of. And rather than expecting them to think about it and say, oh, you'd be great for this, instead say, I've got some skills that, well, on paper may not seem directly applicable, but really this is what I was doing, and this is how I think it translates to the work that I want to do.
And spinning off of that, an interview question you'll probably get a lot, or a type of, is, tell me about a time when you showed initiative. And the answer is not, well, I did it this time. The answer is, I did it this time, and that shows how these are the skills I used, and these are how those skills will be helpful to the position I'm hiring for. So I would think that management experience would look good on a resume. And then when you get into the interview settings where you really do that, you explain, well, yeah, maybe that doesn't look directly relevant, but here, how you answer that question can really show that.
Yeah, and I think the broader point that Juge mentioned about just really knowing, who you're applying for or what position you're applying for, spending time doing the background research, because everyone has their own skill set that they've developed since, high school or, even earlier, and figuring out a way. Some of them don't easily translate into litigation or policy work, but really thinking about it. I mean, that's really where you impress employers and think, hey, that is a skill that we could use around here. And, for instance, at my old law firm, I noticed on their firm webpage that they work with a lot of co-counsel, and I'm just thinking right away, I mean, that management skills in that arena would be hugely, hugely helpful. So just think about it, I'd say.
Thank you. We have about 6 minutes, and I've just been told that we have a special visitor coming at 5 o'clock.
Oh, is John coming? Oh, that's great.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
But in those 5 minutes, we had another question that I think is sort of interesting and maybe a good way to end this, which is, if you're sort of passionate about environmental issues, there's something about the nature of, environmental protection, environmental law, that does that make it harder to be dispassionate, or does your passion for the topic help you in your work?
Well, I'll start. It is a really interesting situation from a couple of different perspectives working for EPA, because when you think of a broad perspective, I was teasing Rebecca that I probably should have been in the middle of the table, with maybe Earthjustice on one end and maybe Juge down on one end, because that really is...
And Lockheed Martin out there.
That really is how it works out a lot, is EPA kind of ends up in the middle of the most contentious policy and legal political decisions that there are out there. So just from the nature of the setup that we have, EPA is often forced to walk a line that is neutral, although people on either side will disagree that it's neutral. So that's interesting from a broader perspective, but it's also true in my individual work, is with not deciding the policy, your personal policy views really don't matter. And so, and our job is to provide the best legal counsel, legal advice that we can. So if the policy decision is made that maybe you personally disagree with, that doesn't really change what your job is. Your job is to defend that as well as you possibly can. So it can lead to some tension if you're going into especially government work and you have an idea that my policy views, I'm going to express them, I'm going to change everything. That might lead to some stress down the line. So that is an interesting place to be.
Yeah, and I can say, you know, working in the public interest arena, passion drives a lot of the work that we do. Honestly, it drives me on a daily basis, and it's really exciting work that I get to do. But it does also add a level of stress, you know, because you do get kind of invested in it. But I think it's a great thing, and I mean, to be able to work based on your passion for something it's a great opportunity. But you know, there's other interesting positions too, and I think what Grant just talked about is, you know, something to be aware of when you're working. When I was at my private firm, I often, you know, felt, gosh, you know, I'm not interested in this as much, but, you know, you kind of tap into other parts of you that, you know, want to either win or want to see, you know, as lawyers, you want to see what's just occur, but, you know, passion is a big part of it.
Yeah, I agree. Passion is huge, and if you're in private practice, there are a lot of different ways. If you represent large companies, that you can sort of express your passion outside of the practice. I've mentioned a couple of those before. Even when you're representing companies and you're representing clients, just doing the best job you can. You know, it's a complex world, and there are a lot of stakeholders in it, and everyone needs good counsel. And in large part, I think, in my experience in the environmental world, you know, the largest companies in the world, many of them are looking to do the right thing and the good thing. And as you're the lawyer, you're their client. If you've got a real passion for the environment, you can really counsel your clients. They're going to do the right thing anyway, but certainly your passion will sort of help to aid that, and you'll be looking for sort of innovative ways to help solve their problems in the most environmentally friendly ways possible. So passion is a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things I like about the Environmental Law Institute, and this is not just a plug for you guys, because Lockheed Martin's been a member of it for many years, is they really take, you know, varying parties and bring them together so that we're trying to work together. Everybody really should have the same goal, which is the betterment of the environment. And again, working for a defense contractor, I was saying to Grant, you know, we've got Go Green programs, we've got LEED certified buildings, but at the end of the day, we still make weapons of mass destruction. I mean, let's just not sugarcoat it. So there's a way that we can still work with Earthjustice, with NRDC, with Sierra Club, with Environmental Defense, because I really truly believe that our environmental safety and health people within the organization that number well over 500 corporate-wide, and the 3 environmental lawyers who support them and who support the efforts really do have a passion, because we truly believe that we're trying to do the right thing and we want to do the right thing. And that regardless of the fact that we make F-16s, we still, on the environmental side, want to do the right thing. And we partner, believe it or not, with our DoD customer on a lot of that stuff, which I know some people find hard to believe. My own siblings don't believe it sometimes, but it's actually true. So I think passion is extremely important, and I think belonging to an organization like the Environmental Law Institute takes companies like Lockheed Martin and broadens our focus. I think earlier we talked about broadening focus, which I think is extremely important. I think it was your question about, you know, broadening your focus and working for organizations that you wouldn't normally think about. And the Environmental Law Institute really does that. They really have an ability to have Lockheed Martin sit down with Earthjustice and say, okay, what are our goals here? What do we really want to do? And I think that makes you potentially a better environmental policy expert, better natural resources expert, a better environmental attorney, when you can see the other side and understand what people are doing. And I think it makes your passion feel completely sincere, which I personally feel is important for job satisfaction.
Yeah, we are lucky to live in a country where we have the rule of law to begin with, and we have a set of environmental laws that are pretty good and are pretty demanding.
Right.
And your job as, you know, and I guess, you know, I was marginalized to this side of the table in the analysis there, but I represent, you know, Fortune 50 companies, multinational companies, on a day-to-day basis, and my passion about environmental issues is incredibly helpful because A, it helps me do a good job, it helps me be interested in the issues, and B, my clients are not clients that want to be right on the edge of what the law is. They want to be the leaders in the world on some of these issues, and your job, my job on a day-to-day basis is saying, you know, sort of, it is helping them to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can continue to debate where you're going to have a bigger impact on the environment as to whether or not you are the leading working for a very small non-profit focused very narrowly on an issue of illegal logging, and with a business card that says senior campaigner, being your role is to be passionate and an advocate for the forests and very focused on that issue, or sitting in corporate counsel's chair and advising companies that when the ship turns, and it takes a bit to turn some ships, the impact on a global level is huge. And I've been in both sets of shoes exactly, and I'm not sure where the outcome is and which has the bigger impact, but I know that both are incredibly important, and as long as you're doing a good job and, once again, enjoying the job that you're doing, that passion could be put to very good, very beneficial use.
For those who don't know, this is John Cruden. He's ELI's new president.
For about 2 or 3 days, spending all of my time learning about those things. Although I'm rather pleased that you all are here. I bet everybody on the podium right now is telling you it's really a good time to be an environmental lawyer. This is a good time. The issues that are present, the things that are happening on the Hill, the things that are happening, the debate that's going on. The Supreme Court has taken another environmental case within the last 2 or 3 weeks, which will attract new attention. You know, the Supreme Court just came out with a big deal decision on AEP, which also attracts a lot of attention. So all of these things bring new life to our profession and new opportunity for each and every one of us, and it's why it's exciting to be an environmental lawyer today. So I welcome you all. Glad you're here at ELI. This is the center place where these things are happening. And thank you to our guest speakers. Thank you to our podium. Thank you for being here and to sharing your knowledge. I'm going to run off. We're doing a symposium right now on the environmental consequences of war.
Oh.
We're at the Reagan building, so I'm going to run over there right now. But I just wanted to say hello to everybody and thank all of our speakers and my friend Mary.
Thank you, John. Good seeing you.
Well, I don't want to keep you any longer, unless, well, I should just...
I see wine out there, so that's always good.
Without further ado, thank you very much. This was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you for coming. And
Our pleasure.
and
Great questions.
Yeah.
Munchies.
Silence.